We ready? Okay. Give me 1 second here, folks. Okay. Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Let me get to my first slide here. Oops. Okay, let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together. Pray that you'll help us to, while we want to look at these things with a heavy heart, to always remember that we have the ultimate hope and your return in cleaning this mess up. Pray that you'll bless us today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, it's good to be back. Just by way of recap, in case you didn't see, I did an update last Monday when I was in Green Bay. I also did Stand Up for the Truth with David Fiorazzo on Tuesday. You can go to standupforthetruth.com and get a copy of that if you want to listen to that. I'll touch on some of those subjects that I touched on Monday and today, because when I'm doing things alone by myself in a hotel lobby, it's very difficult to monitor the people walking around and what I'm seeing, and I'm trying to monitor the feed, but there's like a 15 or 20 second delay. So I know some of my slides didn't show up, and then I knocked the cable out of my microphone. So it's very difficult to do these things on your own. If you notice, most people, a lot of them they either don't use any slides, or they have a staff of people, a couple, 3 people that help them, and I don't. So I apologize for the technical errors. It's just something I'm trying to overcome as we move along. But Pam and I had a great time. I spoke at the last day's Bible conference, prophecy conference, Bible conference in Calgary on May 5 and 6. You can go to last day's Bible conference YouTube channel, and you can find all those videos. I spoke 4 times. I also spoke on Sunday at, I always get the name of the church wrong. I think it's Parkland Grace Fellowship. We'll try to post the link in the show notes to all of those videos. There is also, Carl Kirby spoke. He's a great apologist, used to be with the Answers in Genesis. Great speaker, particularly oriented towards youth. I know at Parkland Grace we had a large contingent of young people and children. They kept them in the service, and I highly recommend that. It's not going to kill them to hear this stuff that we talk about. And it was really cute. In the back row of the church, there were like 8 little girls from 3 different families, and they were sort of all lined up in height order from about age 9 down to about age 6. It was neat, and they were sitting back there listening, and at least till I got to speak, they were listening. And great people there, great conference. Pam and I traveled 6,700 miles, 5 Canadian provinces, all the way from Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario to Vancouver, and then from Seattle down to Portland, and then back east to home. Anybody who tells you that the world is overcrowded is intentionally blind. They're either lying to you or they're intentionally blind and moronic, because we saw a lot of empty spaces, big agricultural farms. So, but let me make one comment about that. As we talk to people in Alberta and other provinces in Canada, a large part of Canada is a huge agricultural producing region. It's very flat, prairie, farms, cattle ranching, sheep, goats, that type of thing. They say that Saskatchewan, it's so flat that if your kid or dog runs away, you can watch them for 4 days as they leave. And probably a little bit of truth to that. These huge salt flats in Saskatchewan, and just great people in Canada, and people came from all over. It was really wonderful. So in 3 weeks, I'll be in going to Scotland, doing a Memorial conference there on the 16th to the 18th, north of Glasgow, and I'm not even going to try to name the name of the town. Go to moriel.org and you can get information on that conference. And then end of June, I'll be doing a conference with Tom Hughes and a bunch of other guys in San Diego. And then the end of August, which is when you really want to go to Texas. We'll be going to Texas to do a conference there. So a busy summer. Pray for us. And if you see Pam, wish her happy birthday. Today's her birthday. I won't tell you which one. We ran into somebody. When we were in Green Bay, the restaurant gave her a little flair on a piece of cheesecake, and we told one of the ladies there how old she was, and they go, "Shut up," and which I guess was a good thing. So anyway, it's a difficult week, hard to organize all of this, and I'm going to just sort of scratch the surface on a couple things. We could do a deep dive on any one of these topics and spend 3 hours. So I'm going to talk about sort of the alphabet movement in the United States and elsewhere. I'm going to talk about the some of the politics and privacy and that type of things, artificial intelligence. And then we'll look at the Middle East and several important things that went on there. And I'll mention a little bit about the Russian-Ukraine war, because that does impact the Middle East and the world geopolitics and the alignment of what I think can only be described as a new world order that's coming out of this. That may or may not involve the United States the way things are going. So we talked about this: acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding. My first talk focused a lot in Canada. My first talk focused a lot on this. Talk about this verse all the time, that when Daniel got all these prophecies, I mean, he got a huge download. He got Gentile world empire history from his time, shortly after his time, for a couple centuries, and then the end of time. And he said, when is this all going to happen? And they said, it's not for you to know, Daniel. Seal up the book until the time of the end. And at the time of the end, many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And then parallel passage in Daniel chapter 11 says, the wise will instruct many. So we want to be people that are in that wise group that instruct many. This was interesting, and this was part of one of my talks in Canada. I think it might have been the third one. I don't remember. You have to listen to all of them, I guess, to find out. So listen to 1, 2, and 4, and then you'll realize, it must have been number 3. Lord, you have been our dwelling place, Psalm 90, in all generations, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And say, return, O children of men, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, and like a watch in the night. One thing that we saw as we drove around was we had some interesting conversation with locals. We tried to go to local restaurants if we could. We stopped at this great little diner, Wannabe's Diner in Winnipeg, Canada. And it was just a little, maybe could get 25, 30 people in there. If every seat and all the counter was filled. Lady had been running this for 30 years. She did not like the Prime Minister of Canada. That seemed to be a common theme once we got away from Ontario. By the way, Ontario, the weather was lousy. We went across, as I told the people in Canada, we spent over 2,400 miles on the Trans-Canada Highway from Sault Ste. Marie all the way to Vancouver. And even though we were on the Trans-Canada Highway that long, at the end, Pam and I still identify with the sex that we were assigned at birth. And, well, I'll just share the other one since me and I, everywhere we went, we had to do conversions. Liters to gallons, Canadian dollars to American dollars, kilometers to miles. And then I said, I got up to speak, and I said I was told I had 45 minutes to speak, and I didn't know what the conversion rate was from Canadian minutes to U.S. minutes, but I assumed that I got more U.S. minutes than Canadian minutes. So those of you who've been here at FBC will understand that. So the other thing that was, so when we talked to these locals, this lady said, I was shut down for a year, almost a year on her business. It just about killed her. And in some places you saw just in these downtown areas, economic devastation. Folks, you need to understand that, and I'm not saying that because you aren't smart enough to know, just understand that we're in the midst of a major economic crisis. Exactly how this unfolds and when is up in the air. I don't think it will be good in any circumstance. Commercial real estate is collapsing all over the place. There are buildings in, for example, downtown, in Sault Ste. Marie, all the businesses seem to be closed, except the cannabis business, which is now open. And of course, when we crossed the border, they asked us if we had any cannabis, and I don't know if they were marketing for the local stores, but sometimes you go out in the middle of nowhere, Ontario, and you see some different things. You'll see a Chinese restaurant, you'll see a Middle Eastern restaurant, with shawarma and falafels and all that stuff. And you'll see these cannabis stores, and sometimes in a strip center, you'll see one at one end and one at the other, and maybe one in the middle. It's all over the place. In New York, I don't know if I have an article about that. There was an article today in the New York Times that said, listen, we have a problem in New York with people driving high because they've approved cannabis. But nobody ever gets arrested for that. And that's a little bit disconcerting when you're driving these, the Trans-Canada Highway is not limited access 4-lane, except maybe in the big cities like in Calgary and Winnipeg. It just goes right down through the main center of town, like Broad Street would be here in Columbus, downtown Columbus. No, limited access exits or anything like that. And so you're wondering, what are all these people that are driving around high? And it's concerning because you don't know. And you literally are taking your life in your hand. And by the way, we did see an albino buffalo in it was either southern Canada or northern Montana. I can't remember which side of the border it was on. I don't think it cared which country it was in, to be honest. But we saw it twice, going down to Glacier National Park and coming back. So we took a picture of that. But we live in this absolutely insane world. People have completely lost their minds. I'm going to give you some examples of this. For example, this is a report from Fox 5 in New York that the mayor of New York has come up with a plan to cut down on shoplifting. This is destroying downtowns everywhere. The lockdowns destroyed a lot of businesses, and now people are shoplifting at epidemic proportions. And it says here, so here's what he proposes, Mayor Adams in New York. Give first-time offenders intervention programs instead of prosecution. That's going to really make them not want to shoplift, right? De-escalation training for retail employees. In other words, don't confront them. Really. Establish neighborhood retail watch groups to share theft info in real time with one another and the NYPD. And then this one, I love this one. Install kiosks in stores to connect would-be thieves with social service programs. I'm thinking this was one station this was the Godfather weekend. They were playing all the Godfather movies. And I'm thinking Vito Corleone he would be laughing. He would laugh himself to death on this one. So there's legislation going through state legislatures everywhere. And some of it's good, some of it's bad. So I'm going to show you some examples of some of the debate that took place. This is Minnesota. They were debating whether they should establish, enact a law to establish a database to flag certain viewpoints. So this is a conservative legislator asking the sponsor of the bill some questions about the bill. This is in two parts. Here's the first part.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Vang. If a Minnesotan writes an article claiming or arguing that COVID-19 is a Chinese bioweapon that leaked from a lab in Wuhan, and someone reports that article to the Department of Human Rights, is that something that the Department of Human Rights should put in their bias registry under your bill?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Niska, not all incidents are considered, I guess, violent or criminal, as I said before. And so this clearly, if with the rhetoric that we have seen since the pandemic and regarding accusing Asians of bringing in the coronavirus, that is bias motivated. And so that can be considered a bias incident.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think I heard yes to that, which is very troubling to me, that someone making a factual argument along those lines, I think is something that's within political discourse, would be included in the Department of Human Rights database. Let me ask you another question, though, if Representative Vang would yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Vang. If a Minnesotan is wearing a T-shirt that says "I love J.K. Rowling" and someone sees that and reports them to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as an example of gender identity or gender expression bias, is that something that the Minnesota Department?
Okay, so you heard the first one. The first one was her response was it was word salad. It didn't mean anything. It was just all mumble jumbled. It was complete nonsense. Well, it won't be, but it will be because it could be anti-Asian bias. Even though you're speaking the truth. And I've got another example about this, about one of our favorite left-wing billionaire funders of things later on. And what they're doing is they're making the people who would complain about that, you're biased, you're a discriminator, you're like this. And this is happening all over the world, in Canada especially, and elsewhere. Now he says, what if someone says, "I love J.K. Rowling" T-shirt? Now, we won't wear one around here because she wrote those, which I think are bad books, Harry Potter books. But she's come out and she's a feminist, so she's spoken against this transgender alphabet soup stuff where men are competing in women's sports and men are using women's locker rooms. I read an editorial this morning, I think it was in the New York Times, by a lesbian activist who likes to wear masculine type clothes. And she says, I get hassled when I go to the bathroom. She's missing the whole point of why people want to preserve the privacy of the bathrooms. It's just, people are insane. They cannot reason. So he says, well, somebody wears an "I love J.K. Rowling" shirt, will they end up in this database? And listen to the answer that she gives. Mind you, she's one of the drafters of the legislation.
Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Vang. If a Minnesotan writes an article, then
Okay.
I think I heard yes to that, which is very troubling to me, that someone making a factual argument along those lines, I think is something that's within political discourse, would be included in the Department of Human Rights database. Let me ask you another question, though, if Representative Vang would yield.
She will yield. Representative Niska.
Here we go.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Vang. If a Minnesotan is wearing a T-shirt that says "I love J.K. Rowling" and someone sees that and reports them to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as an example of gender identity or gender expression bias, is that something that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights should put in this bias database?
Representative Vang.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Niska. I think this question will best be answered by the lawyers. I'm not a lawyer myself. I think in the language of the provision, we have looked at the language to make sure that a substantial part of any incident has to be relating to bias and hate and motivated. And so I will, I'm not going to say a yes or no to that question. It is really up to the those investigating to decide whether there is substances.
She doesn't know what she's talking about. Can you see that? Well, we put it in the law because we wanted it to have this effect in the law, but we don't know if it will have this effect, so we'll have to leave that up to the lawyers. Listen, you drafted the legislation, lady. What do you mean by it? And she cannot answer the question. Why? Because it's absolute nonsense. It's insanity. I got to put a slide in order here. Give me 1 second. It's just so maddening. Okay, now back to this. Okay, so now that's bad law, and I believe that law passed in Minnesota, and you can bet that the lawyers are going to decide. So now here was a legislation. It was one law called "Let Them Breathe" legislation act in, or "Let Them Live," "Let Them Breathe" legislation in, or "Let Them Live," excuse me, "Let Them Live" legislation in Nebraska. One of it was to ban abortion. They eventually compromised on 12 weeks. After 12 weeks, no abortions, unless it's just a horrible situation, life or death, which we'll see if the courts honor that. Legislative Bill 574. And then the other was to ban this hormone blockers, chemical castration of young kids. The cruelty of these positions that people have is just absolutely shocking to me. That they will chemically castrate a child to further their agenda. And so what you see here is you see this article from the New York Times this morning, or the yesterday, I'm sorry, talking about a 1-2 win for conservatives in Nebraska. It passed the Nebraska legislature, which has a veto-proof Republican majority. The governor, I believe, has said he will sign this legislation. And the New York Times is just having a meltdown about how bad this legislation is. In the course of the this, it says here, the proposal approved on Friday bans surgeries and calls on the state's chief medical officer to establish criteria under which puberty blockers and hormone therapy may be administered to people younger than 19. The restriction will be enforced starting on October 1st. State Senator Ben Hansen, who proposed attaching the abortion limit to the bill restricting transgender care, said neither side has emerged with a clear victory. Democrats in Nebraska's 49-seat unicameral legislature, which is supposed to be nonpartisan, did not see it that way. They expressed concern that the chief medical officer, who was appointed by the Republican governor, would establish onerous requirements to access puberty blockers and hormones. I hope so. These things have not been tested. And there is a demonic agenda behind this stuff. And if Right Wing Watch wants to pick that up, be sure you get the quote right. It is a demonic agenda, and there's a lot of Christian pastors in this country who feel this way. The bill says that puberty blockers and hormones may be prescribed to patients who have a long-lasting and intense pattern of gender nonconformity or gender dysphoria, which began or worsened at the start of puberty. But that's when it begins, and it's when people are going through puberty that there's a lot of very emotional time for some people, very difficult time for a lot of people. But now we see this stuff going in clusters. I saw a statistic that about when I was in high school, and we talked about who identified as LGBTQ, it was under 1%. Now you get into the younger generations, it's 20% or 20 to 25%. Did that just happen? Or was that an agenda that got forced down people's throats to make them change their minds like that? So this lady here, she's signaled out as someone who, she's a good person who's fighting against this ridiculous Republican legislature. Her name is Melissa Kavanaugh. She's a Democrat, and her family's been involved in Democratic politics forever in Nebraska. And here's what she said this is her on the floor of the Nebraska legislature, giving her case for why this bill should be defeated.
We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people.
Okay. I mean, really? This is just terrible. So we had the Durham report this week. And we also had legislative hearings in Congress. Jim Jordan, my local congressman, heading up a committee on the weaponization of government. And you should go and watch the sessions that are online if you're interested in that, because it's very troubling. They brought in 3 FBI whistleblowers. All of them one of them merely reported that he had read this on a right-wing news site. He was suspended without pay. Another one had just moved across the country. They delayed the delivery of his furniture. His wife had just given birth to a child. And the one guy was suspended without pay. And in addition to that, they revoked his security clearance. And until all of that is resolved, he's not allowed to work anywhere. They're weaponizing the government against people that disagree with the powers that be. And Andrew McCarthy has a phenomenal article at National Review called Democrats Cook the FBI Books on Domestic Terrorism. And what these FBI guys said is that, back in the day when we had this incident, they would treat it as one case. But when things came up about protests at the Capitol and that type of thing, they broke it down. Each case became an individual case. And maybe the case against one individual would be multiple cases. And so what they could do is they could say, look at the growth of right-wing extremism and white supremacy. We used to have 3 cases. Now we have 2,000 cases or 8,000 cases. They cooked the books. They made the statistics look like it's a bigger problem than it is. And so what Andrew McCarthy says, the summary of his article is May 19th in the National Review. It may be behind a paywall, but you should be able to get it if you don't read a lot of the free. You get 2 free articles a month at National Review, so you should be able to get it. It says here, the projection of a dystopian America mired in a terrorist war waged by the Democrats' political adversaries is false. And Andrew had talked about this in some other articles. He said, the objective of this proposal is not to improve national security. As I explained in 2021, if that were the aim, Democrats would not engage in the subterfuge of attempting to change federal law's perfectly serviceable definition of domestic terrorism for the purpose of insulating jihadists and left-wing radicals while targeting their phantom white supremacists. I don't know any. I really don't. I know the first 2 categories. I really don't know any in the third. The real purpose of this legislation is twofold. Stigmatize as terrorism policies the progressives oppose, establish in law requirements that induce the FBI and other federal agencies to inflate the number of domestic terrorism investigations, the better to assist that, though you'd never know it given the absence of, actual terrorist attacks, the country is under a white supremacist siege. Exposing this demagogic scheme is an important purpose of House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan's subcommittee on the weaponization of government. That subcommittee held a hearing on Thursday at which 3 FBI agents testified as whistleblowers, relating both how the Bureau has been politicized into serving this Democratic political gamut and how they had been retaliated against for reporting the situation to Congress. Jordan's subcommittee issued a report that is startling. Agent Steve Friend, a 12-year veteran and SWAT team member who has detailed how the FBI labors to inflate the number of terrorism cases and uses SWAT resources unnecessarily in arrest scenarios to create the impression that it is apprehending dangerous terrorists. You've seen this. They go to a grandmother's house. She's 80 years old, or they go to the abortion activist, anti-abortion, pro-life activist in Philadelphia who has like 8 kids, and they show up with 25 people. And when they're confronted about it, they go, no, it wasn't 20. That's a lie. It wasn't 25. It was only like 23. There were 2 guys that sat in the car. Okay, so maybe 20, but it was really only 23 that approached the house with long rifles. This is America. This is not the America we grew up with. This has been changed, and this is happening all over the world. It's happening in Israel. It's happening in the UK. It's happening in Canada. There are a number of pastors who've been in and out of prison in Calgary for protesting Drag Queen Story Hour. I showed you a picture of one. He was thrown out of a room and got arrested for, I don't know, trespassing, or I don't know what it was. It was just ridiculous. And he's been in and out of prison a number of times. It's happening everywhere. Neil Gorsuch, who, you know, I don't think any Supreme Court justice is perfect. There are a couple that I really like Thomas and Alito, and I'm liking Gorsuch more and more. I think he was a good appointment on balance. This week they had a case that came to the Supreme Court about Title 42, and I won't go into all the intricacies of Title 42, but Title 42 essentially allowed the government, in the face of a medical healthcare emergency, to do some things with immigration, and it expired last week. And we have this massive invasion going on the southern border. And you listen to Karine Jean-Pierre, the latest propagandist that occupies the office of, or the position of White House press secretary, who never answers a question that's a difficult one, who's a complete embarrassment to anybody who values basic competence in a job. It's awful. And so she'll say, well, there's no problem on the southern border. What are you talking about? And you can go watch Ben Bergwam and other people who have videos, Michael Yan, who are talking about the people coming through the Darien Gap, and they're Chinese, they're Islamists, they're Chinese young men, young military-aged men, and they're just coming to the border. Remember when this came up during the Obama administration, I raised the issue of how do these kids get from southern Mexico border with Honduras or whatever the country is down there, 1,200 miles to the U.S. border? Oh, they're walking. Baloney. They're putting them on buses and planes and shipping them up there, and it's all funded. And it's funded by these left-wing NGO groups, a lot of whom got money from financial settlements that should have gone to people who might have been harmed back in the 2008 financial crisis. Billions of dollars went to these people to radically remake America. There's just no question about this. So when this Title 42 thing came to the Supreme Court said, listen, you know, you need to go back. The case is really moot now. The thing's expired. The healthcare emergency has expired, and go back, send it back and dismiss the case. Gorsuch, though, did something very unusual. I don't know that I've ever seen a Supreme Court justice do that. So I want to give him credit where credit is due. I want to read a few paragraphs from his statement that he issued. And he says, I agree with the decision of the court. But he says this, since March 2020, we have experienced the greatest intrusions on civil liberties in the peacetime history of this country. Executive officials across the country issued emergency decrees on a breathtaking scale. Governors and local leaders imposed lockdown orders forcing people to remain in their homes. They shuttered businesses and schools. This would apply in Canada as well, public and private. They closed churches even as they allowed casinos and other favored businesses to carry on. They threatened violators not with just civil penalties, but with criminal sanctions too. They surveilled church parking. This is a Supreme Court justice taking the time to write this. One of the guys whose life was threatened by the release of that decision on the Dobbs case, which nobody's been prosecuted for to date. They threatened violators not just with civil penalties, but with criminal sanctions. They surveilled church parking lots, recorded license plates, and issued notices warning that attendance at even outdoor services satisfying all state social distancing and hygiene requirements could amount to criminal conduct. They divided cities and neighborhoods into color-coded zones, forced individuals to fight for their freedoms in a court on emergency timetables, and then changed their color-coded schemes when defeat in the court seemed imminent. Federal executive officials entered into the act too, not just with emergency immigration decrees. They deployed a public health agency to regulate landlord-tenant relations nationwide. Not even in the Constitution. They used a workplace safety agency to issue mandates for most working Americans. There are certain words I probably shouldn't say. They threatened to fire non-compliant employees. And they did. And they don't get their jobs back. They've destroyed lives. This is the thing that they talk about, we're so compassionate, we care, we love everybody, we just want people to have a happy life. Baloney! They don't care. The left in America, in the UK, and Israel, Canada, wherever, is like Germany on foreign policy. On foreign policy, Germany is almost always wrong. So the left is almost always wrong on everything, and they will accuse you of what they are all the time. They warned service members who refused to get the approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019 might face dishonorable discharge and confinement. Along the way, it seems federal officials may have pressured social media companies to suppress information about pandemic policies with which they disagreed. While executive officials issued new emergency decrees at a furious pace, state legislatures and Congress, the bodies normally responsible for adopting our laws, too often fell silent. Courts bound to protect our liberties addressed a few, but hardly all of the intrusions upon them. In some cases like this one, courts even allowed themselves to be used to perpetuate emergency public health decrees for collateral purposes, itself a form of emergency lawmaking by litigation. And he goes on to say, listen, they created a climate of fear, and they got away with it. And now we need to decide what to do. A leader in the middle of the paragraph, a leader, the expert who claims he can fix everything, if only we do exactly as he says, can prove an irresistible force. We do not need to confront a bayonet. We need only a nudge before we willingly abandon the nicety of requiring laws to be adopted by our legislative representatives and accept rule by decree. Along the way, we will accede to the loss of many cherished civil liberties, the right to worship freely, to debate public policy without censorship, to gather with friends and families, or simply to leave our homes. We may even cheer on those who ask us to disregard our normal lawmaking processes and forfeit our personal freedoms. Of course, this is no new story. Even the ancients warned that democracies can generate towards autocracy in the face of fear. Go get that decision in the case of Arizona versus Alejandro Mayorkas, Secretary of Homeland Security, issued Thursday, May 18th. And hopefully Mayorkas will not be the Secretary of Homeland Security much longer. That guy needs to be impeached. So this is in Alberta. So I'm going to move on to something else now. So in Alberta, they were having a lot of wildfires, particularly north of Calgary, a few hours up around Edmonton and further north. But even yesterday, I saw that Edmonton was very smoky, and we're going to even have haze from these wildfires that are raging. I think we saw one or two as we were driving across the prairie. And you'll just see huge areas that have been burned and huge areas that were burning. I mean, like I said, in Saskatchewan, if you can see your kid leave for 4 days, when they run away, you can see a prairie fire miles and miles and miles away. And we did see at least one or two. But here's another thing. This is from the Hill. So we have this economic problem. We saw windmills all over the place, and I would say 80% of them weren't turning, even though it was windy out. They're taking away Dave Walsh on War Room about a week ago Saturday, did about 15, 18 minutes talking about how they're going after the EPA issued new rules in the United States to go after new power plants that use natural gas, because now for the first time, carbon dioxide is considered a pollutant. It puts at risk, so go arrest those trees out there, right? And you're breathing it out like a freight train, 3 pounds a day on most people. And because of that, the grid is at risk. Go listen to Dave Walsh Energy on Getter, or go to a War Room. And I think it was Saturday the 13th. Dave Walsh did a phenomenal job of laying this out. We have a major problem. And now, so look at in the orange area, that's elevated risk of blackouts this summer. It looks like most of the United States, at least the western 2/3 of it, like from the Mississippi River all the way to the west. How does this happen in a country like America? We have like 2 Saudi Arabias at least in America. 3. Alaska, western Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio, upstate New York, and Texas, and Oklahoma. How does that happen? They're trying to tear down everything in the system and rebuild this new world order that they want. And when it happens at the time when there's the convergence of all these things, the concern is this is being done to set things up. So let's look at artificial intelligence. Times of London on the right, AI is a clear and present danger to education. Well, old style education, new education, it's not much of a threat to because they're not teaching anything anyway. But look at this, ex-Google executive Mo Gawdat warns that AI will view humans as scum and could create killing machines. So now there's this debate, articles this morning in the New York Times and elsewhere saying, there's a debate going on about artificial intelligence. Is it really that bad? Is it really a threat to humanity? Or is this just science fiction stuff that people are talking about? And I get emails from people on both sides of this. I'm telling you, I think it's a big deal. I'm very concerned with where this is going. Not so much that they're going to design something to kill automatically, but the way they're going to tear down society with it. And it's already happening. So this week, there was a Senate hearing on artificial intelligence and some interviews with Elon Musk. Here's a clip of that, sort of a mashup of those and what was testified about and talked about in interviews, including Elon Musk.
Technology outpaces regulation. The unbridled exploitation of personal data, the proliferation of disinformation, and the deepening of societal inequalities. We have seen how algorithmic biases can perpetuate discrimination and prejudice, and how the lack of transparency can undermine public trust. This is not the future we want. That voice was not mine, and the audio was an AI voice cloning software trained on my floor speeches. The remarks were written by Chat GPT. OpenAI is an unusual company, and we set it up that way because AI is an unusual technology. We are working to build tools that one day can help us make new discoveries and address some of humanity's biggest challenges, like climate change and curing cancer. We believe that the benefits of the tools we have deployed so far vastly outweigh the risks, but ensuring their safety is vital to our work. GPT-4 is more likely to respond helpfully and truthfully and refuse harmful requests than any other widely deployed model of similar capability. We think that regulatory intervention by governments will be critical to mitigate the risks of increasingly powerful models. For example, the US government might consider a combination of licensing and testing requirements for development and release of AI models above a threshold of capabilities.
Mr. Marcus, there's no way to put this genie in the bottle. Globally, it's exploding, but there's no way to stop this moving forward.
Let me just insert, there are more genies yet to come from more bottles. Some genies are already out, but we don't have machines that can really, for example, self-improve themselves. We don't really have machines that have self-awareness, and we might not ever want to go there. So there are other genies to be concerned about.
Where I think the licensing scheme comes in is not for what these models are capable of today. As we head towards artificial general intelligence, and the impact that will have, and the power of that technology, I think we need to treat that as seriously as we treat other very powerful technologies, and that's where I personally think we need such a scheme.
Mr. Altman, maybe you can help me understand here what some of the significance of this is. Should we be concerned about large language models that can predict, survey opinion, and then can help organizations, entities fine-tune strategies to elicit behaviors from voters? Should we be worried about this for our elections?
It's one of my areas of greatest concern, the more general ability of these models to manipulate, to persuade, to provide sort of one-on-one, interactive disinformation. We're going to face an election next year, and these models are getting better. There's a lot of policies that companies can voluntarily adopt, and I'm happy to talk about what we do there. I do think some regulation would be quite wise.
And I see, OpenAI backed by Microsoft, Anthropic is backed by Google. Are you worried about the corporate concentration in this space and what effect it might have?
I think there is benefits and danger to that. Like, as we were talking about all of the dangers with AI, the fewer of us that you really have to keep a careful eye on the absolute bleeding edge of capabilities, there's benefits there.
Mr. Marcus, real quick.
There's a real risk of a kind of technocracy combined with oligarchy, where a small number of companies influence people's beliefs, and that has enormous influence on how we live our lives. And having a small number of players do that with data that we don't even know about, that scares me.
Sam, I'm sorry.
One more thing I wanted to add. One thing that I think is very important is that what these systems get aligned to, whose values, what those bounds are, that is somehow set by society as a whole, by governments as a whole.
Well, now you have a new CEO.
Yeah.
Why?
I think Linda Yaccarino is going to be great.
Why?
Twitter is very much an advertising-dependent business. Linda is obviously incredible at that, and she's just a great executive in general.
Let's talk about free speech a bit. You call yourself a free speech absolutist. You want Twitter, and this is
aspirationally.
Aspirationally, you want Twitter to be as truthful as possible, the most accurate source of information about the world. So what does that mean for how you police lies on the platform? You mentioned community notes. Is that the extent of it?
I think community notes, yeah. I mean, I'd say, so my overall kind of vision for X or Twitter is to be a cybernetic collective mind for humanity. This is going to sound quite esoteric and sci-fi, but in pursuit of that objective, you want to have information move quickly, have that information be accurate, and you want to have error correction on that information. So you can think of community notes as like an error correction on information in the network.
Our guest today is Geoffrey Hinton, often referred to as the godfather of artificial intelligence.
I talked to Elon Musk the other day, and he thinks we'll get things more intelligent than us. And what he's hoping is they'll keep us around because we'll make life more interesting. If you have a world without people in it, or without animals in it, it's just not as interesting as a world with people in it. That seems like a pretty thin thing to rest humanity on to me. But he thinks it's quite possible these things will get much smarter.
Well, that's all very encouraging. So if you go back, and I've talked about this a lot, so just to recap, 60 Minutes did a wonderful, I think, very balanced piece on general artificial intelligence. And one of the things that came up in that, and that ought to concern you, is that there's a new book out called China's Race to Control Life. They want to control life from the beginning to the end. That's what, and whoever said it was right. The genie's out of the bottle. We can shut everything down in the United States, but do you think China's shut it down? Do you think Russia's shutting it down? Or other people are shutting it down? And these corporations that are beholden to shareholders and profits are going to say, if we don't do this, we're going to get fired. And people will sue us because we're not doing what we can with the technology that we have. And I said, drive out there on Beach Road there in New Albany and look at all those big buildings. Those are all full of computers. And there's data centers like this all over the world. But what they did on the 60 Minutes thing was they went to a guy, and the guy said, one of the best things we did with artificial intelligence, it took us a couple years to figure out how to do it, to do 3D modeling of organic proteins that are essential for life, all forms of life. The rule of thumb was that it would take a PhD scientist 5 years full time to unlock the three-dimensional structure of one protein. After 2 years of working, they were able to unlock the 200 million proteins in literally seconds once they had that structure in place. So 1 billion years of PhD time has been reduced to seconds. That's the very definition of exponential growth and increase. And so now I believe you start to get a little bit of understanding about when Revelation 13 talks about he gives life to the image of the beast. I think we're starting to see a little bit and understand how this is maybe going to play out. And it's very concerning, because if they can unlock these proteins, they're going to do the same. They're going to take that model, they're going to take it over to DNA and to genes and editing and CRISPR, all that technology, and they're going to unlock life. We've just been through a big experiment. Understand where it's going, and that there are people that are going to take control of that, I think, that are going to use it and bring about the end of this. And so, look, I know that we win in the end, okay? But I also know that there's a lot of pain and suffering that comes in the meantime, and I don't like that. I mean, I do have a soul and humanity and that type of thing, unlike some of these automatons. Everybody says, well, Elon Musk, he'll save us. He took over Twitter. He just hired a lady who was the head of the panel of the World Economic Forum, the panel on the future of work, as the CEO of Twitter. She was in advertising with MSNBC, and for about 12 years before that, she worked for CNN. She's now in charge of, she's going to be running Twitter. Musk's stated goal on this, and you need to be very careful with him. I mean, he was married to a lady who I would only describe as a witch, or lived with her for a while, had a couple children. He has like 8 or 9 children by different women. I don't know how many different women, at least 3 or 4. And everybody, oh, look, he's so great, he's saving Twitter for us. But he says what he wants Twitter to be is like the all-encompassing app. Payments and everything. And that's going to bring in digital currencies and all sorts of things. And he wants it to be the one app for everything. And when it's one app for everything, it can be controlled by one person. That ought to bring into play a lot of the prophecies that we read about. And I like these articles they're talking about. I mean, the graphics that they use. Here's one I read. I don't remember where. I think it was in futurism.com. This is an artificial intelligence. What if it gets a hold of weapons? Ooh, that might not be so great. When I was in Green Bay with David Fiorazzo and Mary Danielson at Stand Up for the Truth, they were working on, they're probably doing a show this week on this chart, the censorship industrial complex. Understand that this stuff we're way down the road on this. And I've talked about some of these companies. For example, I did a presentation, I did a lot of screenshots and documents of Moonshot CVE. That's a based in the UK, but it's people that came from America they were working with the federal government on, quote, disinformation about elections and that type of thing. Durham came out with this report, and he said the FBI was wrong. So what was the response? Well, crickets in most of the mainstream media. They didn't talk about it. If they did talk about it, they said, well, look, the FBI changed everything, so everything's okay. They already made the changes. Oh, they left the same people in place, but they made the changes. Somehow, I'm not really comfortable with that. I mean, do I have like a big stupid stamped on my forehead? But, so these are some of the companies that are identified. New Knowledge, Yonder, these are all Disinfo Cloud, Digital Threat Analysis Center, Graphica, Moonshot CVE. Those are for-profit companies. There's a lot of nonprofits. Here's academic initiatives, Automated Controversy Detection, Information Futures Lab at Brown University. I'm sure that's good conservative think tank, right? Here on the right, Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, Stanford Internet Observatory, Clemson University and Media Forensics Hub, Duke Reporters Lab, others, Institute for Strategic Dialogue, Alliance for Securing Democracy, German Marshall Fund Integrity Initiative, the Aspen Institute. I've done a lot of videos from Aspen Institute. So this has been going on for a long time that, some of us at least have been tracking it, but it's coming about very quickly. One of is you dig down into, they have, this comes from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and they have all these little different books and everything that have been written, and they just go on for page after page. The role of blockchain technology for monetization in the far-right online media. Look at the titles and see how they're oriented. These are the titles that they recommend or things that they've published. So who are they oriented in favor of and against? Very easy to figure out. The Hydra on the web, challenges associated with the extremist use of the Fedverse. Researching the evolving online ecosystem. Telegram, Discord, and Odyssey. These are all things that I would recommend that you use. Oh, I've just identified myself as someone to be watched. Access to social media data for public interest research, lessons learned, and recommendations for strengthening initiatives in the EU and beyond. I mean, it just goes on and on with these things. Down in the lower right-hand corner, in the blind spot, how right-wing extremists use alternative platforms for radicalization. To the left, analysis of social media platforms response 100 days after U.S. Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade. What do you think the orientation of that paper is? Do you see this? I mean, this is the title is that David Fiorazo Mary shared with me is exactly right. The censorship industrial complex. It's just, then you have big tech. You have all these foundations that are involved in it. It just goes on and on. Now, we talked a little bit about the FBI and how they've been intimidating people that are pro-life. So here's a lady, she's a pro-life activist, and this is a Ring camera encounter that was recorded on the Ring camera. I highly recommend that you get them. It was great. Some people were doing some work at the house, and Pam's like, hey, you missed a spot in the back. And the lady's like, how are you doing this, And we're out in the middle of nowhere, and Pam's watching them work. So here's this. I believe they went to the home of the mother of this activist, and this is the encounter that took place.
For Elise?
I'm sorry, she's not here. Can I
You have to turn it up.
in regards to?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ashley Roberts, and this is Kathleen Brown. We're both with the FBI.
Okay.
We just need to speak with her regarding some information that was sent in to us.
Okay. Well, she doesn't live here.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, she's my daughter, but this isn't her residence currently.
Okay. Do you mind giving us her residence or her phone number by chance?
Yeah, hold on just a second.
Sure. She's not in any trouble. We just have information that we need to ask her about.
Okay. Here. Do you mind if I take a picture of your badges?
Unfortunately, we're not allowed to have anyone take our pictures.
Can I see it again, please?
Sure.
I don't know how to tell if you guys are fakes or not.
Yeah. Well, you can always call our office too, and they can verify our employment because it is weird. Not every day you get a knock on the door from the FBI.
No, and I'm like in a meeting upstairs, so I wasn't trying to not answer. Well, yeah, I was trying not to answer the door.
No worries,
And I'm like, oh my gosh, whoever's at the door is being like uber persistent. Give me a minute.
Sorry.
So no, that's okay.
We can leave you our office number if you'd like to call.
Yeah, let me do that. That sounds good.
I'll write off another one.
And here's a rule of thumb. I have, not because I did anything wrong or anything like that, I got caught up in at least one investigation. And I got subpoenaed to an FBI interview. You need to be very careful talking to the FBI. You lie to them, they will charge you with a crime. Go ask Martha Stewart about that. Okay, so you can go, and I went to an interview and it involved tens of thousands of emails about a particular company. They never showed me, in 4-hour interview, they never showed me one email, but they asked me questions about a lot of them. Do you know what they were trying to do? They were trying to trip me up to get me to charge me with a crime, and then they could manipulate me. And so you have to be very careful. You have to be trained on how to respond to them. And if they come to your door, are you charging me with anything? No. Then thanks for stopping by. Let me see your ID. I want to write down who you are. I would, in this environment, I would not talk to them. You have no obligation to do that. There's a thing called the Fifth Amendment that applies. You cannot be made to be a witness against yourself. And, they come there, we just want to, she's a well-known pro-life activist. And do you know where she lives and what her address? Do you think they don't know that? Well, they know everything. They came to intimidate this lady's mother and by extension, intimidate this lady. This is an egregious violation of the law and civil liberties. And everything that Neil Gorsuch said in that statement that he issued in connection with the Title 42 decision applies 100% to this. I've talked to people in connection with, the Washington, D.C. thing a couple years ago. Oh, the FBI just came and talked to me. They just wanted to ask me some questions. I'm like, you didn't talk to them, did you? Well, you cannot assume that they're your friends anymore. I'm sorry. I mean, I hate to say that. But go watch Jim Jordan's hearings this week on the weaponization of government in the House and look at what they did to these FBI agents and Marine people who served a couple tours in Iraq or Afghanistan. These are patriots. They've destroyed their lives. We don't live in the same world anymore, okay? And, I see questions like, well, how bad does it get before we get out of here? Well, at least this bad. I can say, and we're all adjusting our end time scenarios because we all thought we won't have to see any of this stuff, but we are. So and it's not going to change. I was looking at some things in This is red states pressure JP Morgan on religion because JP Morgan is debanking conservative and religious organizations. And they're a big employer here in Columbus. I mean, go down, maybe the largest office building in the country is down here at Polaris. This is what I talked about with, this is from the Wall Street Journal about a week ago, a death sentence for fossil fuel power. EPA's new rule means the end of natural gas fueled electricity. Well, that's going to work out great for all of us. So I talked about Ukraine on some issues recently. So I want to sort of tie things together in the Middle East a little bit. So understand that there's this stuff going on, and I kind of call it the Psalm 83 scenario. I know people think it's been fulfilled or it's not a prophecy that's going to be fulfilled. I think it at least identifies and sets out a perpetual condition in all the countries around Israel. And just translate that into modern times. And what do you have? You have Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and look at what's going on. So they have big meetings. Here's Raisi going to meet with Assad. Iran says, oh, look, we've turned the hourglass upside down. It's now going in our favor. Looked like it was running out on us. Here's this, a big step forward. They had a meeting where they were going to they had a meeting in Russia where they brought together the foreign ministers of Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Russia to meet. And that square table, looks like they cut up Putin's giant table and made it into a nice square one, in the preservation of the environment type thing that Putin, I'm sure, is concerned about. Here's an article, Iran holds international conference on the New World Order. But then look at the imagery here, the harbinger of New World Order. So what's all this stuff going on with Ukraine particularly is leading to the formation of New World Order. It's leading to the formation of countries that may not want to use the US dollar as the reserve currency of the world. That happens, we have major problems. Inflation will go ahead, but look at the imagery that they use and the way they've done this. So you have the three in the middle, you have Iran, China, and Russia that have knocked over the EU king. You see that? And now they're going against the US. So this is front page of the Tehran Times. Here's another thing that they use, imagery. And so this is showing, you're seeing these prophecies about Ezekiel 38 and 39, and the countries involved are coming together. So this is what the Ezekiel 38 and 39 says. These are where those regions that were identified in Ezekiel 38, 39 are today. Now, Turkey had an election. Erdogan did, all the polls said Erdogan's going to lose. And the results were that he got 49.5% of the vote, just a tick away from the 50% he needed. They're going to have a runoff. They've already started voting. I saw a tweet from Erdogan this morning, and he used a big user on Twitter. And Twitter has a great little, and this is artificial intelligence that I like. You click on translate tweet, and it'll translate, does a pretty good job of translating what Erdogan said. And Erdogan wrote to Turkish people all over the world. Remember, he came to the U.S. and went to Maryland, and they dedicated one of the largest mosques in America. And remember, his security guards got in a fight with the Secret Service agents, and nobody got arrested or anything. Outside the White House, Erdogan's security guards, he's an Islamist. He's been in power now for 20 years. Looks like he's going to go to 25 if he lives. And he's saying, everybody go vote. Go vote. You did a great job. Now we have a runoff, and you can vote starting May 20th, yesterday. And be sure you vote in the next week. And you know how to vote. You know who to vote for. And it looks like right now the Kemal, I used to know the guy's name, but can't remember how to pronounce it. So Kemal is actually named, same first name as Kemal Ataturk, who founded the new nation of Turkey after the fall of the Ottoman Empire 100 years ago. So and so all the polls said he's up by 5 points. Well, what was the result of the election? Erdogan won by 5 points. Oops. Well, the polling might have been off. So the pollsters still had a lot of trouble, but he had a coalition of what unified them was they didn't like Erdogan. And now they're all sort of splintering. So I would expect Erdogan to win the runoff, get over 50%, because it's only going to be between the two of them, so one of them's going to win. And he might even win. And remember that this is the Erdogan who a number of years ago, remember this announcement, Donald Trump announced Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the United States is moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And that came out in December 6, 2017. Within a week, here's the Israel Hayom, the Arab League held an extraordinary summit. They issued a statement about how important Israel was to them, held in Turkey December 13th. So a week after Trump made the announcement, they meet. We invite the Trump administration to reconsider its unlawful decision that might trigger chaos in the region and to rescind its mistaken step. Now, two things about that statement. One, it's not unlawful for us. We can do whatever we want. And we want to move our embassy to Jerusalem because that's the capital of Israel. But out. Oh, by the way, might trigger chaos in the region. Did it trigger chaos in the region? Well, it led to the Abraham Accords. Not very chaotic. Now, I'm not a big fan of those, by the way. And so here's the guys who met at that meeting. And who do you see standing to Erdogan's left? Mahmoud Abbas. Now serving at that time, he was only in the 10th year of his 4-year term. Now he's at about year 14 of his 4-year term that he was elected to. And to the right, you have who? King Abdullah II of Jordan, who runs the Waqf. Then you see King Salman. This is not too long after Mohammed bin Salman had been named the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Those who think Jerusalem belongs to them was one of the statements they issued. Those who think Jerusalem belongs to them today will not be able to find a tree to hide behind tomorrow. That's pulling a reference out of the Quran. I remember I had a long conversation with Phil Haney. Remember Phil? He did not, by the way, you can argue about Epstein killing himself. Phil Haney did not kill himself. I knew Phil Haney. He would come through town. I'd go down and sit with him for 4 or 5 hours and talk to him. And this is from the Quran, what they were talking about. And also remember that in Yeni Sefek, they had this graphic on the online paper. Here was the headline of the front page. What if a Muslim army was established against Israel? Urgent action call for Jerusalem is what it says up the top. And then you see this graphic that they use. This is Erdogan's main Islamic mouthpiece. What does that look like? Is there any similarity between what you see there and this little graphic that I made up for Ezekiel 38 and 39? And you see it brings in all of the Islamic countries, including the Central Asian Republic countries. So, let's see. Now I can get to all the new stuff. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. Oh, this is just awful. Hang on a second here. Well, I'm not going to pull it in. So this will be a little economic stuff I need to go to. This is Mises Institute. We have some serious financial trouble. The money supply has plummeted in the biggest drop since the Great Depression. You see that? See what's happened to the money supply? That thing on the right? That's what's happened recently. That's not good by any stretch of the imagination. Christiane Amanpour at CNN, and she was talking about, remember the family driving through the Jordan Valley that were shot and killed by terrorists that have now been, as they say in Israel, neutralized? Amanpour said the family was killed in a shootout. There was no a shootout implies guns blazing on both sides. They were killed, they were murdered, they were slaughtered in the Jordan Valley. Innocent people driving while Jewish from Efrat. Terrible. So let's see. Well, this is kind of interesting. This is a report. This is the. I'll talk about this in a moment. Well, I'm not going to play the video because I don't have time. Go to the UN website. The UN is very gracious to the extent that they can be, and they put all their garbage up for free. So you can go there and you go to UN website, you go to UN multimedia, and you can click and you can watch all these sessions that they put up. And this year they did something unusual for Nabka Day. Nabka Day is the day when the Palestinians and all the Arab countries celebrate the tragedy that happened in 1948 when Israel became a country. Israel became a country on our calendar on May 14th. They celebrated on different days. And so Nabka Day is usually the day after that when the Palestinians claim they were forced into these refugee camps that they remain in today. Some in Arab countries that Israel has no control over. So process that, what that means. So this year at the UN, they had a Nabka Day at the UN. And you can go watch it. Mahmoud Abbas droned on for 40 minutes saying that Israel was like Goebbels from Germany back in the 30s. That's what he said. That's his mindset. And so here, this was an article in Tehran Times. They had these articles they showed exposing the myth, narrative of an ongoing disaster. Palestine was not an empty land, Britain everywhere. And so that's all this propaganda. Now, in the midst of all that, this is from the Khorasan, Iran Khorasan newspaper in Persian, and that you can find the Tehran Times and Israel or Iran Kayan, K-A-Y-A-N, they have websites. It's an article about what are they doing? They're putting together two countries, these two countries, Iran and Russia, a corridor that's going to be used to sort of replace the Suez Canal. And I actually think I have a little video on that I can show you. I do very well on this, by the way, in putting everything in this nice, logical order. And then by Saturday night, I'm like, I give up. So I'm going to turn the sound off on this.
Via sea, rail and roadway.
So you can see what they're doing is they're putting together a corridor between Russia and Iran. And by that, they want to bring in the Central Asian countries into this corridor. They want to bypass the Suez Canal. They want to bypass going through the Mediterranean to Europe. They want to bypass the Baltic region because that Russia, it's a very narrow passageway. So Russia wants control of this. So they're putting together a 7,200 mile long corridor, railway and sea thing to transport things down to a port, a big port that China's built down on the Indian Ocean. So you see how the New World Order thing is changing and everything is coming together. And this Gadahar port down here in the Indian Ocean near Pakistan, right there, the one that's sort of flashing yellow, the red one. This is a huge port, Chabahar port that they've built. This was built by China. It's a massive port, and it's to change world shipping and things that are doing. So understand this is a big deal. And I apologize, I didn't know the guy was going to give us vertigo here. And so they want to do this by next year. Less than a year, they want to have this railway in place. So it's changing this sea lane that goes around this way to one that goes this way, straight across Iran. Interesting that that's happening at this particular time. The other thing that happened this week was there was a huge meeting in Saudi Arabia where all of the people got together, and you can see them in the picture there. This was the Arab League, and who do you see over there second from the right is Mahmoud Abbas, now in the 14th year of his 4-year term. And the purpose of this meeting, which took place in Saudi Arabia, was to rehabilitate and bring back into the fold the wayward prodigal son known as Bashar al-Assad of Syria. And you see him sitting there, and you see al-Sisi of Egypt to Assad's left, and then our right, and then to the right of that, on the other side of that, if you could zoom in, right there you go. You see King Abdullah, you see the guy from Sudan is there, all these guys. It was interesting, go ahead and zoom back out. On the sidelines, there were a number of meetings that took place. One of the meetings that took place, the guy from Qatar, he wouldn't meet with Assad. Because why? Assad's tied into Iran, which is Shiite, and the Qatar guy is big Sunni, Muslim Brotherhood, the biggest supporter of Muslim Brotherhood. So here's a meeting that took place between Assad and Mohammed bin Salman. Significant meeting. This is important stuff. This does have huge end-time implications, and I'll be talking about this more in the days, weeks, and months ahead. So here they are meeting with Assad. And then somebody else showed up to meet with the Arab League guys.
Anyone who defends his native land from invaders, and anyone who defends children
there he was.
Of his nation from
Zelensky
enslavement.
Showed up. And he's trying to get support. And I think it's very significant that he's fighting a war with Russia. And you could read a little bit about Daniel chapter 7, around verse 7 and 8, and see whether you think that's what applies now. Russia is also making big inroads into Africa. The Wagner Group is pushing things there in Africa, including Central African Republic, which has just completely fallen apart over the last 20 years. I've had many friends who were missionaries there for many years. They had to leave about 20 years ago when the rebels came in. They always had pressure from the Chad and other countries with Islamic rebels coming in. Now they're going into the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Back in around 2000, if you looked at a map of the most evangelized countries on planet Earth, according to evangelical organizations, the most evangelized country on the planet was the Central African Republic. And it ought to be, it's an object lesson, okay? I mean, I knew pastors that were trained in seminaries that missionary organizations had established there. My father was involved with one of them. They had probably a fourth of the country attended a Grace Brethren church on a Sunday. It's all fallen apart. Medical programs, dental programs. And it's an object lesson as to what can happen if you don't hold firm to the faith. Because they got under severe persecution and things started to fall apart. Now, I don't know the exact extent to which they've fallen apart. Maybe I'm overstating it, and if I am, I apologize, but it's an object lesson as to what could happen in the church as things get under persecution. This week, Tim Keller passed away. Tim Keller was pastor of, I want to say, Redeemer Church in Manhattan. He was a favorite of a lot of people, but he was a big guy who was supported and pushed in certain directions by Bob Buford from Leadership Network and other organizations that were about numbers and not truth. I believe he was a Marxist. He was into a lot of mysticism, and he was in many. At least his wife seemed to be a squish on the alphabet people. You know what I mean by the alphabet people, LGB, those things. So I'm going to try to use that. I'm going to have to develop Charlie Vector 019er code type language for that. So let me just do a couple more things here. I have a video I want to show you. Here's Zelensky in Saudi Arabia. Some good articles you ought to read. There's an article by Melanie Phillips, The Weaponization of Anti-Semitism Against Conservatives. Jeffrey Tobin at Jewish News Syndicate has a good article. Oh, here's Christian Amanpour. This is what she said. Listen to what she said. This is her own words, so you can say I didn't make it up. This is how she described what happened to that family in the Jordan Valley.
We also have the mother of two sisters, Israeli-British sisters. They were killed in a shootout, and now the mother has died of her injury.
And she's been asked to apologize. She won't do that. Caroline Glick has a good article. Soros, anti-Semitism, and the progressive assault on language. And whatever Caroline says in this is just absolutely spot on. Elon Musk is being criticized because he really came after George Soros. Oh, George, you're an anti-Semite. They could care less. They're only using Soros' ethnic background to weaponize their dislike for Elon Musk because he's trying to restore free speech. And they're doing it to everybody. So Caroline has a lot of things in here. Here's what she says in her article. The most discussed demonstration of how the popular term for Jew hatred has been weaponized is the pile-on against multi-billionaire and free speech champion Elon Musk by supporters of multi-billionaire and progressive political warfare bankroller George Soros. Soros funds the progressive camp through his Open Society foundations. In many respects, Soros should be seen not only as a funder, but as the ideological leader of the progressive revolution because many of its keynotes and organizations are his brainchildren. And she's exactly right. You go get this article at Jewish News Syndicate, and read it. It's very good. I've actually slipped over this one. In the UK, there's a court decision. You can email me through the church email if you want. I'll get you a PDF of it. The judge ruled in a court case in the UK. You know, the people that signed the Magna Carta that now have King Charles, and I could go on about some of the symbolism in his coronation, but I don't have time to do that. That the school can force Christian children to participate in gay pride marches. That's not a violation of their conscience. Freedom of religion is over. Today, Ben Gvir visited the Temple Mount, and they had a bunch of meetings that were taking place. They had Jerusalem Day, and this is what one of the things you saw as Jerusalem Day was coming was a left-wing activist. People were going to go to Jerusalem and march in the March of Flags. Pam and I saw this in 2017 when we were there. It's a very emotional thing. If you love Jerusalem, you love Israel, you love the Jewish people. But they were blocking tunnels to get to Jerusalem so people couldn't participate in what did happen, this March of Flags. There's Jewish, Israeli flags all over the place. This is at the Temple Mount. And they dance around and they're waving their flags and all this stuff. It's quite emotional. In Jerusalem today, though, in the cabinet meeting that was held today, it was held down. It's happened a couple times before, but they held it in the Western Wall tunnels. If you've never been down in these Western Wall tunnels when you're in Jerusalem, you've missed it. I had not gone till this past December, It blows your mind, the structures that are down there that are related to the period of the Second Temple, when the Romans controlled Jerusalem and Herod built up the Temple Mount and renovated the Second Temple. It's unbelievable. So there, and this is the Jordanian paper on the right, Al Ghad newspaper. It says this is what the Jordan paper says, the Israeli occupation government held its weekly meeting today inside the Al-Barak, that's the Temple Mount wall tunnels, in the occupied city of Jerusalem for the second time after the 2017 meeting led by the so-called Jerusalem Ministry and the Israeli government headed by Benjamin Netanyahu. The meeting aims, according to Israeli public radio, to endorse a large number of Judaization projects in the Holy City on the 56th anniversary of the city's occupation. And that's how they view it. And so here's a picture of the meeting that took place today. The cabinet meeting, you see Ben-Gvir there on the right, and some of the other ministers in the Israeli cabinet. Here's another picture of the meeting. And the structures down there, it blows your mind. What you see at the Western Wall is like 9% of what's there that isn't exposed. It's amazing. And here's a group picture. So as I said, Zelensky was in Saudi Arabia for a meeting. There were attacks by Russia on a bunch of different sites. The U.S. has provided a lot of air defense systems. There were claims that they shot down Russian hypersonic missiles. I don't know if it's true. Let me tell you. I try not to talk about it because there's so much propaganda flying around on both sides. I don't know who to believe. Now, the Wagner Group did release a bunch of videos today indicating that they had taken over Bakhmut. This is a battle that's been raging for about 250 days. It's not that strategic a city, except that's where they're fighting. That's what often happens in a war. So here's the Wagner Group saying we now control Bakhmut. Now, in connection with the missile attack by Russia Monday or Tuesday, as I said, there were a bunch of missiles shot down. Russia says we didn't use any hypersonics, but there was this one explosion. A Russian missile hit what appears to be an ammunition dump. Here's what that looked like. This is in a Ukrainian city. I can't remember which one. Now there's a lot of, I don't know what's true. So there's speculation that the UK had sent a lot of ammunition shells with depleted uranium in them. Russia attacked that, blew it up, and now there's a radioactive cloud making its way towards Europe. I do not know if this is true. I don't know if the depleted uranium that was in the shells, assuming that that's what they were, would create that kind of radioactive cloud that would be damaging to people. I'm just not convinced of that. But look, I think in the end, Russia's going to win this. And the question is, how far is Russia going to be pushed? Are they going to be pushed to use nuclear weapons before somebody gets a clue that says, we can resolve this thing? You know, there's a way to achieve a peace. And Russia's threatening nuclear strikes on the U.S. and elsewhere. Biden agreed yesterday to give F-16 fighters, older versions, but F-16 fighters to Ukraine and train the pilots the earliest that they would be able to be operational if that happened, and if they weren't shot down on their way to Ukraine by Russia, would be September. So there may be some big things happening here this fall. Very volatile world, a lot of pieces in place, but you see a lot of the alliances forming, you see the economic, you see the artificial intelligence, you see Ezekiel 38, 39, you see the Arab alliances that are forming. And Saudi Arabia came in and said, listen, we support the Palestinians. And so what happens if King Salman passes away? What's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman going to do? It's going to be an interesting time to watch. And so I saw one some prophecy guys put up a video that says, what's it look like before we're out of here? And the answer is, as I said earlier, at least like this. We already know now that a lot of this stuff, things are going to happen. So the Lord is in control, and he has us. So, we need to know as believers, who believe in the blood of Jesus Christ for the salvation of our sins, that whatever happens to us, we're with the Lord. And we need to live like people that expect that. Could be it happen in any number of ways, and we don't know when. So let's live like that and share the gospel with people. Let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your day. Thanks for the great trip we had and all the wonderful Christian brothers and sisters that we met and the friendships that were made that we'll certainly enjoy for eternity with these people. And we just pray, Lord, that you'll help us to find opportunities to share the gospel, to be bold, to act like men, to stand firm in our faith, and just give us those opportunities as we live in troubled times, but with the answer to everyone's troubles. Bless us this week in Jesus' name, amen.